Do you like feeling sore after you work out? Most people are pretty opposed to the idea of feeling achy, feeling beat up, feeling sore after their workouts. And yet for so many people, it is extremely commonplace to feel achy, beat up, and sore from their workouts. So is this just the way it is with exercise, or are there things that you can do to actually reduce the likelihood that you get sore from your workouts? On today's episode of the Exercise is Health podcast, that is exactly what we're going to be discussing. We're going to cue the intro song, and then we're going to dive right into this conversation. Welcome to the Exercise is Health podcast, where we're talking about exercise, health, and the interconnectedness of the two. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we will be coming to you every single week from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg. Hey, what's going on, exercisers? This is Charlie. Before we dive into this week's episode, I want to ask you if you've ever thought to yourself, wow, the information on the Exercise is Health podcast is so great, but how do I go about implementing it? This is a question that we've been hearing time and again from so many of you. And because of that, we have created something that you are going to absolutely love. And that is the One Workout Away Challenge. See, you are just one workout away from feeling stronger, from functioning better, and from living healthier. And over the course of 28 days, Julie and I want to teach you how. To learn more about the next One Workout Away Challenge and get signed up, go to owa.matschaumburg.com. And without further ado, let's get into this week's episode. Hey, welcome back, exercisers, to the Exercise is Health podcast. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we're coming to you from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg, here in Schaumburg, Illinois, where we believe that your health is your most valuable asset, and the single best thing that you can do to both boost and protect this asset is exercise. Specifically, exercise is geared towards building the health and function of your muscles. Now, so many of you exercisers have taken the time to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, and it means so much to us when you do that. And so we just want to take a moment right now to highlight one that we recently received.
This 5-star review says, "These podcasts are what everyone who is exercising needs to know. They tell you how to listen to your body, test out how low you can go before breaking form. It matters that you stay in your range rather than trying to do it faster. Totally a great find." Thank you so much for that review. I love everything that was said in that podcast, and I actually chose that review because I feel like it kind of talks about a little bit about what we're going to be talking about relative to soreness and the achiness that you might feel after you work out. We would love it if you also would leave us a rating and review. You can go to Apple Podcasts, or I like to do it just right on my Apple Podcast app. And we want to hear from you. And who knows, maybe your review will be read here on the podcast and it will help us out greatly.
So I remember distinctly in both high school and college, the first really heavy, intense lift after basketball season ended. Oh my gosh, I was so sore the next day. And you saw it everybody, especially in college, everybody on the team would be just limping around campus.
Oh my gosh.
And that was just what was expected. And I remember feeling sore after that lift, not for 1 day or 2 days, but legitimately for 4 days until it was time to go. And it was always lift legs again. It was oh my gosh. And that was just what I expected to happen. And so I completely accepted that that was the norm. But I don't know that it should be that way.
Charlie, I love that example because that's so normal for athletes and that's so normal for non-athletes. It's there is an acceptable amount of discomfort that should happen after exercise that we deem as good. I think sometimes we realize it's kind of bad. Probably in your situation, you're wow, I'm sore for 4 days. Or probably in the mindset that you had at the time due to lack of education, you probably thought wow, that was a killer workout. Yeah, great.
There was no thought going through my head of this is a bad thing. It's yeah, this is uncomfortable, but this is what has to happen in order for me to get stronger. It was seeming like a necessary evil in order for me to get the results that I wanted.
Yes. And I think a lot of people are in those shoes, and we do it probably in a more low key level than being sore for 4 days. But a lot of times people will, find some way to make it good, like they're sore the following day and it hurts to sit on the toilet. And they say, well, I like being sore because then I know I did something. Also, there's a handful of you guys out there that hate the feeling of soreness. I know I've had a handful of clients that have come in and said, I tried this program, or I tried that program, or I tried this training studio, and I left because I don't want to not be able to sit on the toilet. I don't want to not be able to go up and down the stairs, and I couldn't for 2 days after my session there. So that wasn't for me. So I feel like we have a pretty mixed bag, because I know that our listeners, you guys are all exercisers, but you come from different backgrounds of whether it's I'm here strictly to improve my health, or I'm here and I have sports background, or I'm here and I have an athletic background, or I've been in the gym for forever and I'm a gym goer, but now I'm, changing my perspectives to become more health conscious when I exercise. So I think we usually have a mixed bag, but anyways, we want to talk about ways that you can adjust your workouts to minimize the soreness and achiness that you feel after your workouts, because contrary to popular belief, you do not need to feel sore and achy to have quote unquote done something. Or I feel like when we say done something, you mean like we did something productive. So to do productive things for your health in the gym, you do not need to feel sore and achy the following day.
And this is such a big point to address up front, is because if you are used to feeling sore after you exercise and you continue to exercise despite feeling sore, well, I think one of the stories that we often tell ourselves is, well, this is a sign of me progressing. This is a sign of me getting stronger. I have to tear the muscles down and then they build themselves back up stronger and bigger and everything like that. So in order to get the results, the soreness has to come with it. And the reality is that's not true. We're not going to dive into the ins and out of why it's not true. In fact, I go really deep into why that's complete nonsense in the book, The Exercise for Life Method, that we wrote that came out this past summer. So grab a copy of that if you want to get into actually why it's complete nonsense. But what we're going to talk about today is, well, let's say, just play with us for a second, that maybe you don't actually have to feel sore after you exercise in order for your health to improve, in order for your strength to improve, in order to build muscle, in order to get more fit, in order to get more toned, all the things that you may want from your workouts. Let's say you don't actually have to get sore in order to get those results. And let's also pretend that getting sore is actually not going to get you the results faster. In fact, let's pretend it might actually slow your results, which, by the way, it does. So this isn't pretend. This is very real. But just go down this thought with us. So if that's the case, right? You don't want to get sore. You don't need to get sore. In fact, getting sore after your workouts is prohibiting you from progressing and prohibiting you from getting your results. Well, then how should you go about exercising? What things can you do? How should you tweak your workouts in order to minimize the risk that you get sore? That's what we're going to talk with you about today.
Charlie, you're so right. And I want to just branch for a quick minute that we were saying, hey, well, what would it be like if you weren't getting sore? And if you've listened to our podcast before, we've often talked about your need for exercising and moving every single day. I think one of the biggest things that many people get from not being sore is that they can exercise every day, or they feel energized enough to exercise every day. And not only that, I don't know about you, Charlie, but when I do a workout that I'm doing the workout and I know I'm going to be sore the following day, I usually feel pretty cruddy right after the workout too. You feel pretty depleted. Sometimes you might even feel like you get some cold or flu symptoms, your body's like, oh my gosh, and you want to just chill on the couch. I usually eat a ton of sugar after. Your body is trying to overcompensate for this mega stress that just happened to it. So when you adjust your workouts in the way we're going to talk about, you're going to feel better after your workouts, and you're going to feel like you can exercise on a more consistent basis, which again, the consistency of exercise is really what brings about many of the positive health changes that we want from exercise. So structuring each workout this way is so important.
Absolutely. So when it comes to or what things can you do differently, or how should you conduct your exercise, I just want to briefly touch on what things we often think lead to soreness that actually don't. Because
good one.
Yeah, because when we can identify those, and then we can start to get into, well, what actually does create some kind of soreness, well, let's adjust our workouts for those variables. So things that actually do not create soreness, muscle damage. Muscle damage is not necessarily a driver for soreness. There may be muscle damage and there may be soreness present, but one doesn't necessarily lead to the other. That's a pretty big misunderstanding. Lactic acid buildup, okay? That is another myth. That's like, oh, well, I'm sore because of this buildup of lactic acid within my muscles. That doesn't happen. So because of that, lactic acid buildup does not drive soreness. So those two things, I think, are two of the bigger myths around why we feel sore, is we're damaging our muscles or we have this buildup of lactic acid, neither of which is true. So we can kind of move away from those ideas, right, and start to discuss, well, what things actually do influence soreness? What things might actually create this soreness that we experience? And a lot of times what I see is it's not actually structural issues with the tissue, meaning like, muscle damage, but it's actually kind of how your nervous system is interpreting the state of the tissue. Meaning, like, if you overdo it in one form or another, and because of that, your nervous system says, hey, we're going to kind of downregulate this area a little bit, that can start to create some soreness. That may be a signal that your body interprets as, okay, we need to let this area rest. But it's not because the area is damaged, and it's not because there's a buildup of lactic acid there. It just could be that your nervous system says, hey, this area needs to rest a little bit, so we're going to start creating these sensations of soreness there.
Charlie, I have a great example of exactly what you're talking about. So I had this client that came in and she had just done like a killer glute workout. So a whole bunch of glute work. And think about, exercise is a stress on the body. We try to structure the stress so that it's productive, but too much stress breaks down function in your body. And so my client came in, her glutes were sore as all get up because she just did this crazy glute workout. And she's like, I don't know what we're going to do today because my glutes are really sore. And anyway, she came in for a muscle activation technique session. So I said, well, let's get on the table. Let's just see where your body is not functioning well, because with MAT, we try to improve function. So as Charlie said, a lot of us think that when we feel soreness, there's either buildup of lactic acid or there's muscle damage. And both of those would just take time to change, right? And that's what we normally experience. We do a crazy workout, we have sore glutes, and then 3 days later, our glutes feel better because the muscle has healed. That's our prediction. But anyways, so my client got on the table. We did the motion assessment looking for function deficits. We worked on different activities to improve the function of these glutes and other areas that were supporting the glutes. And within an hour, that sensation of soreness almost disappeared, almost all the way. And so it's very interesting because had she not come in to do MAT, then she probably would not have had that drastic change in sensation within 1 hour. It would have been like that normal 3-day experience that most people have, or however many days you have. So with MAT, we're working with the nervous system to try to help communication. So just like what Charlie was saying, that this might not be muscle damage, and it very often isn't muscle damage, although that is a very believable and understandable story that makes sense in our brains. But the amount of experiences that we've had when we're just working on someone's function and trying to get someone's nervous system to improve and make function better, how much that changes the sensation of tightness is mind-blowing. So it makes me really think, well, maybe it really isn't muscle damage after all. And it's not like we ever can like peel the skin back and be like, I wonder what's going on inside. We never get to see. So all of these are always theories. And I think that theory of muscle damage takes us a long way because it's something that is very believable to us as the exercise consumer. Now, I do want to highlight something that Charlie said too, with when we feel that sensation of soreness, it's a really nice way of your body protecting an area that was just basically harassed in the gym. If you think about, our bodies are always trying to protect ourselves. So when we do something overly stressful, whether it's a certain workout, whether it's every workout, whenever we do something really stressful to our body or something that is too stressful, our body is going to respond in a way to help protect it. And a really good way to protect our body is to make it feel uncomfortable in certain spots. Because what do we do about that? We usually let it rest. We usually avoid it. Or we usually do something to, improve blood flow there, like get a massage or stretch it, or we try to get rid of that sensation. That sensation is very powerful to us as humans. I think we all hate pain, tightness, discomfort. And so our bodies actually intentionally set that up. And so when we do something overly stressful, we have to really respect that tightness and that soreness, because that is there on purpose, and it's our body's way of saying, hey, this area needs to chill for a while. We did way too much.
Absolutely. And I love that story that you told. I think so many of us have seen that happen with our clients from an MAT perspective, where a client comes in, they're feeling sore, whatnot, in a certain area. And, maybe we work on that area, maybe we don't. But either way, at the end of the session, it's like, well, did your muscles completely repair? Or did all the lactic acid that wasn't there to begin with get flushed out, or whatever, right? But it's a really dramatic change in sensation that can happen in a relatively short period of time.
I do want to say one thing before we move on from that idea, is that I've had a handful of clients where we've done something similar, but we've just used exercise, and we're going to use the principles that we're going to talk about.
Yeah,
now.
So that's exactly what I wanted to go to. Was a couple weeks back, I was wrestling around the floor with our kids, and my neck, they were climbing on my neck, they were climbing on my head, and all these different positions that my neck and head weren't really used to going into. I remember distinctly, I woke up the next morning, I'm like, oh my gosh, my upper back, my neck, like it's really sore, right? And I was planning on exercising that day. I was still wanting to exercise that day. And so through my workout, which I worked my upper body, I didn't avoid the area. A lot of times people will be like, oh, I'm sore, I need to avoid it. Actually, I did exercises specifically for it. But because of how I did the exercises, by the time I finished my workout, which it was a shorter workout, it only lasted about 30 minutes or so, soreness was completely gone. I could move my neck completely normally. Everything was good. It was like it had never even happened, even though when I started my workout 30 minutes earlier, I was feeling that tightness, that soreness, that achiness all throughout that area. So yeah, you absolutely can implement the exercise strategies that we're going to talk about in order to change how you're exercising to help kind of get these results for yourself.
As we explore this idea of what principles am I going to apply to help me not be so sore the following day, we are always thinking about stress management, and not stress management the way you think of in terms of what normal society is like mental stress management and, emotional stress management, but it's physical stress management when you're in the gym. Because when we do too much stress on the body, too much exercise on the body, or certain principles of exercise, then we get the soreness and achiness. It means your body got too stressed. But when we do the appropriate amount, that's when your body gets the energized feeling. That's when your body is able to return to this stressor called exercise, because we're making sure it's appropriate. I want to talk about two things together, because one is what we always believe is going to be too much, and the other is usually what is too much. And the first one is a lot of people feel like, I'm sore because I've done too much weight. So if I don't want to get sore, I'm going to do less weight. And weight is a stressor in the gym. And it is very likely that you might have done too much weight and you might have been sore from the amount of weight, meaning, you did 10-pound dumbbells and your body really needed 8. What is actually usually the thing that is too stressful is your range. Most of the time, people don't use enough weight and they use too much range. Most of our clients here at MAS, every time they are getting sore or achy or feeling terrible after a workout, it is because they violated their range of motion, not because they've done too much weight. Although weight can be one that makes you sore and achy, it is oftentimes the range.
Yeah, I'm going to take it one step further and say I've arguably never seen the weight be the thing that makes somebody sore and achy. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not the case for anybody, but I'm going to say it's almost exclusively the amount of motion.
I would agree.
And I'll say almost, because like maybe there's a chance that it's not, but it's in my experience, it's almost exclusively been the range of the amount of motion that's used. I love what you said. Most people don't use enough weight but use too much motion. Or when they do a weight that they perceive as more challenging for themselves, that's really when they use too much motion because they're trying to move it faster. We have the framework called prioritize contraction over motion. They're not doing that. They're not focusing on the contraction. They're focusing on the moving of the weight. And then that just sets them up to move too far, to move too much. And then they blame the weight because the weight was in their mind perceived as heavier. Okay. And so I get that, right? It seems like, oh, it's a really easy story to follow. It's like, well, I did more weight. That's why I'm sore. It's like, no, you did more weight. And so because you were trying to move the weight as opposed to focus on contracting your muscles, you violated the amount of motion that you actually can do with that weight, which means you move too far. And then now you feel sore and you're blaming the weight. Okay. So I get how people get it mixed up, but it's actually not the weight. It's not the challenge. It's not the load. It's the amount of motion that you're using with it. And so that's really the thing that we need to be super mindful of if we want to make sure that we're trying to reduce the soreness that we feel after our workouts.
Yes. So let's talk about some ways to make sure you're always being mindful of your range of motion and you are always respecting your range of motion because, again, violating your body's range of motion for that joint or for that motion is what almost all of our clients get sore and achy from. The first way that I'm going to suggest to start respecting your range of motion is to check your range of motion before you get on an exercise machine or before you do an exercise. You might be thinking, well, that sounds really technical. It's really not. So if you know how to do an exercise, you know how to check your range of motion. So think about, for example, a pull down. You raise your arms up and you pull the bar towards your chest and then you let it raise back up. Think about that motion and then do that motion in the chair you're going to do it or standing next to the machine with no weight before you grab the weight and see where does your body let you move and where does your body not let you move. You want to do this before it's loaded. Another great example is if you're doing a chest press, sit down on the chest press machine and do the motion, like pretend you have the weight in your hand, but you don't, and do the motion and see where does your body naturally stop. And then a first really great step is to try to match that once you do grab the weight. And this can be pretty eye-opening for a lot of people because a lot of people, like what Charlie was saying, use the weight to actually get more range of motion. But you don't want to use the weight to get more range of motion. You want to respect the range of motion that your body naturally has when you're not loaded, when you're not holding any weight.
Yeah, that's a huge piece to this whole puzzle of making sure that your body feels well during and after exercise is understanding and feeling how your body moves and then matching the exercise to that, which is what we call body matching, right? So this is a really big principle that we've talked about quite frequently. We did a whole podcast on it as well, but that's the whole idea is like, all right, figure out how your body moves relative to the challenge that you're wanting to create for your body, and then do the exercise within what your body can do, okay? And I think one big piece to this is that don't just move for the sake of moving. All right. So like when you check your motion, don't just, lift your arm up overhead as high as you can just to see how high it goes. All right. But do it with an intent of trying to see how far your arm can move while still feeling your muscles squeeze. A lot of times we try to just move for the sake of moving. And actually what we want you to focus on is contracting through as much motion as you can do, but prioritizing that contraction. Have the contraction be the thing that drives emotion. And if you can start practicing that as like your warm up and, before you do an exercise, then it's going to be much easier to implement that tip while you're exercising as well.
Great. I love that tip, Charlie. And that is starting to lead us into that idea of being very muscle centric. Exercises that we do to improve our health need to be muscle centric because building the contraction of a muscle is what creates health changes. So we have to respect what that muscle is ready and not ready to do each workout. Now, another really interesting thing that happens when we exercise is your muscles get tired. Have you ever exercised and you're like, wow, my muscles are getting tired? Because we're challenging them. And when muscles get tired or fatigued, their ability to move you changes. And actually, I want to step back. It might change in a way that it makes it better, and it might change in a way that makes it worse. Meaning, when you're kind of warming up a muscle and you're getting things moving, usually your range might change in terms of more range. And then as you start working the exercise and your muscles get more tired, your muscles will change in the way of giving you less range. And it's important that as these fluctuations happen, we're being very respectful of these changes. The first step in doing this, and then we'll add the muscle centric step. The first step in doing this is to move super duper slow, the slowest ever. And it's funny because every time one of my clients come in and they show me an exercise or we practice exercise, they always look up after the first rep and say, that wasn't slow enough for you, was it? I was like, no, it wasn't. You need to go really slow. The slower you move, the more that the focus naturally gets put on the muscle without you even having to think about it. You just have to think about going slow. And the other thing that happens is that your body will naturally stop when it needs to. Meaning, if you're doing an exercise and you're moving slow and you can't finish the rep, or you can't get to the very top or to the very bottom, you're going to find out because you're moving slowly. And if you start moving quickly, you probably could finish that range of motion. That's an example of you changed your pace and violated the appropriate range for that rep. So one of the easiest ways to respect your range as your muscle state changes, which it's going to change as you exercise, is to move super duper slow.
I love that you're bringing this part up because, as we're talking about making sure that you're staying within your range, I was hearing some people thinking to themselves, well, I've gone for a walk before and the next day, I've felt sore. So you're telling me walking is too much motion? And here's the thing, exactly what you said, Julie, is as your muscles fatigue, their ability to move your joints through more and more motion changes. Even though it feels like it's a relatively maybe easy activity or it's an activity that you do all the time, if now all of a sudden you do more of it, well, now your muscles are more fatigued, which means their ability to move your joints has changed, which means the range of motion that you always use when you do that activity may not be the motion that your body needs right now. And in that regard, you may, again, be violating the amount of motion that you're doing. So this is a really huge point, is not only thinking about the amount of motion that you're doing, but thinking about the volume that you're doing and then how your body is fatiguing and being super mindful of how your body is operating as it's fatiguing, moving really slowly. I love what you brought up, Julie, about when you move really slowly, you'll actually feel when your body puts on its natural brakes. And that's a huge thing. It's not, you're doing a curl and you're thinking, well, the brake hits when, my hand gets to my shoulder. That's, for most people, that's not the case. It's much lower than that, where your body will actually put on the brakes, but you can override that when you start moving faster. When you move slowly, you'll feel when your body puts on those brakes, and then you can actually start to do the exercise within what your body can do. And so one thing that I want to bring up is the kind of the way I like to think about this in terms of why this is so important is if you have ever sat down on the couch, put on a movie, and opened up a bag of chips, and by the time the movie finished, you look down and you finish the entire bag of chips, and you're like, wait a second, how'd I eat an entire bag of chips right now? I'm just sitting here watching a movie, I don't even feel full, and then all of a sudden it hits you and you're like, oh wow, yeah, now I feel really full. Well, you didn't realize you were eating the entire bag of chips because you were distracting yourself with the movie. Had you been paying attention to every single chip that you were eating, you would have realized much sooner that I don't need to eat so much. I'm good, okay? How this relates to exercise is when you're not paying attention to your muscle contraction, when you are not paying attention to the motion that you're doing, when you're distracting yourself with your music or your gossip or looking in the mirror or whatever, you're not going to realize that your body's been trying to put on the brakes the entire time until it's too late. And it's too late, once you finish that exercise or once you finish that set or once you finish that workout, and then you're like, oh yeah, now I'm sore. It's the exact same concept. When you distract yourself, you're not going to be able to perceive the signals that your body's telling you, saying, oh, we need to slow down, we need to change, we need to stop, we need to do something because I'm not liking this anymore. And you don't realize it until now all of a sudden your body feels achy and sore.
What a powerful statement, Charlie, with that is your body's way of putting on the brakes. Have you ever I've thought about this a lot, I think, because we're in this field, but how intelligent our bodies are. Have you ever thought about how freaking smart our bodies are and the things we don't even think about? When we exercise and when we live our life, it's almost like our body sees the red lights and puts on these natural brakes called muscle tightness, muscle soreness, and it's our job, our brain's job, to respect that red light. And when our body's ready to give us the green light again, it will take away the tightness. It will take away the natural brakes. But it's important to realize that those tightnesses, whether it's the post-workout soreness and tightness or in the workout, I feel a tightness building, that we respect it and we say, hey, this is a break. It's seeing a red light that maybe I don't see with my brain, I don't feel with my brain, but my body's telling me there's a red light here. The more that we respect that, the more that our body's going to respond in a positive, productive way to this stressor called exercise.
So who do you know that needs to hear this episode? Who do you know that is not interested in feeling sore after they work out? And in fact, that's one of the biggest things prohibiting them from either starting to exercise or exercising consistently, is because they are just so opposed to the idea of feeling sore after they exercise. Share this episode with them so they can learn the biggest things that they can start doing differently with how they're exercising in order to give them the best chance of not feeling sore after they work out. And while you're online, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It helps people find this episode when they're looking for information on exercise and when they're looking for information on health. So if you found value in this conversation today, let us know by leaving us a 5-star rating and review. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week. So what did you think about that episode? Did you find the information useful? If you would like some more in-depth guidance on applying this kind of information to your own workouts, make sure to sign up for the upcoming One Workout Away Challenge. You can get registered by going to owa.matschaumburg.com. This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Gates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.